Oh, oh, hey, it's 2:32. I'm running late. We got 4 people here of the 6. So I'm gonna get going. I think I'm already recording. Yeah, this is for you guys. So anytime you have a question, please feel free to stop me, come off mute, throw out your questions, and we'll answer them as we go. The typical webinar for this grant application is usually like 40 to 60 minutes. That's what it was for planning, grant, and implementation. I think ours is going to be shorter, so I'll try to keep it under a half hour. That's my goal. Quick introductions, then we'll go over objectives. We will talk about the funding and what it's going to look like for the next 2 years in the expansion phase. Then I'm going to walk through the application step by step. The scoring you already know, and then the deadline and timeline and time for your questions and answers. Any questions so far? All right, no, well, we got Ryan here from AAI, Royd from GWeb, and Corey from Iron. We'll get these recordings out for Duchesne, Davis, and Murray City. So here are the grant objectives that you may or may not have seen from actual Utah code. If you go in and look at 53F-5-5 and then go to this section, you will find that it's broken down into 7 areas, and section 505 is all about the expansion grant and the requirements. Let me share them with you real quick. Here we go. This slide deck, by the way, does have links built into it, and I'll just send you a follow-up email to the whole cohort once we're done, so you have all of these. But we go into 505 expansion grant requirements. Here's Kendra. And it's all spelled out for you exactly the way it was in the implementation, as well as in the planning grant. The things I want to call out specifically, first of all, is this webinar. There will be technical assistance training, which will include instructions on completing the grant and the requirements, information on the scoring, and information on personalized competency-based learning. This is kind of ironic because everybody in this room is more of an expert in this area than I am because you've been doing it. But I will just point out that whenever you see in the grant or in the actual code, anything referring to, here it is, like the actual specifics of PCBL, they're talking about our framework, which has changed since you all began this program. The requirements are that you will submit an expansion grant application that meets the requirements established by the state board, that you have attended this technical assistance training or watched the video, and that your application grant has been recommended by the review committee, which we'll do here in about a month. This part of the grant application is not competitive like the planning grant was. We're looking for you to complete the grant application with evidence that you have been implementing PCBL and a solid, realistic plan on how you'll be expanding it over the next 2 years. It does say here that you need to expend the grant funds no later than 2 calendar years after receiving the funds, and we will break that down here in a minute because there is a little bit of a catch as far as, you can't spend 0 the first year and all of it the second, but you can be flexible with it. And then down here, this is what I meant about the PCBL framework. When you see direct alignment with core principles identified in 53F5-502, that's your PCBL framework. And I'm pretty sure that all 5 of you have already looked through this document and have looked over all of the changes and the improvements that we've made. This is your common language, sort of like key right here. Using culture of learning, learner agency, demonstrated competency and assessment, customized supports, and social emotional learning in your grant application can do nothing but help the process. So as long as we're on board with that common language, I know that some of you have your own portrait of a graduate and you use knowledge, skills, and dispositions instead of characteristics or competencies. But here is the only place that we would want to just point out, like, being consistent with the PCBL language that USBE uses, so that when we do go in front of the board and say, here are the plans, it all lines up. Okay, no questions about that. I have a question for you. How in the world do you address all 5 components in your implementation or expansion grant application? The answer is you don't. What we would like you to do is identify what you've already done, what's going to happen next or is happening right now, and then what's going to follow. Now, this is an expansion grant, so we are looking to see evidence that you're moving into all 5 components, but we don't expect you to be masters of all 5 already. Okay. Here's the funding plan for you. The implementation grant originally provided 7 LEAs with $400,000 to be spent in 2 years. The PCBL program is currently receiving $1,996,500 per year. That's the ongoing funding that we're getting. We do have some carryover funding from previous years, and you'll see those in Utah grants, but those are not going to be refilled, right? Like this one is. So we had to be very careful with our budget. And what we basically did was try to figure out, number one, how to continue funding cohort A at the same level for 1 more year. And at the same time, be able to appropriately fund cohort B at their same level and continuing, as well as cohort C. Theirs is going to be a little bit less. So this is kind of like, don't tell your little brother that you got more, but we did have to cut back on what cohort C is getting, and then cohort D as well, in order to find sort of that magic balance of like sustainability, so that we could exhaust the funds that we have that are carryover, but still be able to continue at this rate. So with this magic budget that we came up with, gives us $1,800,000 for the 6 LEAs in cohort A, your group, for the next 2 years. So that's $300,000 over those 2 years. You can't spend all the $300,000 the first year, or it would, break that plan. But you can spend up to $200,000 or defer it, and then have $100,000 for year 2 or more if you don't spend the $200,000. So when you get to that budget section, be sure to let us know how much you intend to spend the first year and the second year, if it's not $200,000 one year and $100,000 the next. So just spell that out in the application. And then please plan, obviously, accordingly, that $200,000 will be exhausted by the 2 years. Now, that is the minimum amount that we can fund. This could change if the amount of funding increases, which is what we sincerely hope for. As we talked about in our last meeting, the Board of Ed is asking, is there a need for more funding? And our answer is going to be yes. If that means they vote on it and approve it, and then it can go to the legislature, we could see an increase in funding. If that happens, then your funding will increase. Also, if one of the LEAs were to leave the program for some reason, which I doubt will happen, but if a district said, we're not interested in expansion, we're not interested in funding, we're going to do this on our own, well, then that would allow us that bucket to then distribute among the LEAs in cohort A that do remain. So what you're looking at here is the minimum. This is what you will guarantee to be funded. It could go up. All right. Any questions about that? No. All right. I shared with all of you last night a copy of the grant application customized to your LEA. In fact, Roy, Kendra, Corey, and Ryan, I remember putting in your emails exactly. Did anybody not get that? Ryan, you're the only one on video. Give me a thumbs up that you got it. Cool, great. Okay, so you have your own version. Inside, you will find basically 12 parts. The first is a reflection on the implementation narrative from last year. And I either copied and pasted your narrative, not last year, the year before. I either copied and pasted your actual text from that implementation grant application into this one, or if it was a lot of text, I put a link to it. So either way, you'll be able to access and read and look over what you wrote for the implementation. Then you're going to reflect on that. You're going to do a summary of the work you've already done, a summary of your current LEA and community needs, which we expect to be different than they were 2 years ago, and a summary of your PCBL initiatives. There is a feasibility table to complete to just give us sort of the groundworks of how you're going to be measuring this, measuring your success. If you're in the DTL grant, you know that there's the dashboard and you're going in and reporting. We don't have anything like that in PCBL. Ideally, I'd like to see something like MTC Grow, maybe if it's not that, something like it, where you can go and be able to put in your progress more than every year or two. But for now, we just want you to put in a feasibility table. List of the schools and campuses in your district or in your charter that will be implementing PCBL, a breakdown of your demographics. We'd like you to identify any barriers. We've asked this question many times. If you just go in and put no, we're good. If you put yes, well, then we'll take a look at the flexibility guide and go from there. List any partnerships, anybody you're working with, professional learning. If you're working with other LEAs, just who are your partners and how are you collaborating? Then probably the most important part, your budget table for that money and the narrative explaining it. Remember that as you saw last month, if you have to adjust your budget, you can always do that by just submitting it into Utah Grants. But if your budget adjustment is more than 20% of your total budget, then it just has to be voted on by the review committee. I've seen that happen once and it was unanimous that it was approved. So you do want to be as on target as possible with your budget table, but remember that it is flexible if it needs to be. And then a list of your stakeholders. The last thing you'll see is the signed statement of commitment. Now this grant application is going to look very familiar to what you submitted before. Go in and open it up. I really hate it that they have to put the bar right there. Okay, so this is not anybody's specific. This is just the generic one. On page 1, I put in a little comment that with your LEA's name. So please use this as a first line of communication with me. If you go in here and you see something and you're like, wait, we didn't see the webinar, you can always highlight that, put in a comment, say, hey, whoever it is you want to, call out me, and I'll then respond to you right inside the document. And we'll just keep this a live, living, dynamic document until the deadline. And then I will either turn off your editing rights or convert it to PDF, whatever works best. Down here are contact information for myself as well as Todd. Then there's the requirements, really simple. This Google Doc has been created for you and hopefully you're attending this webinar today. If not, you'll need to just watch it by the 31st. The application deadline is then at the end of April on the 29th. I've color coded this. The gray sections require information from you. So that's where you're going to go in and actually insert information. The lavender sections are places that I've put in some information, or maybe it's empty and we just need you to confirm that it's correct. There are only 3 places where you have to do that. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Gray sections are directions. So 3 places where I need you to go in and check the information. And then the cyan, those are places where you need to go in and create your own information. And there are 12 places to do that. So a total of 15 areas where we need you to enter information. First one, awards. We need your grant manager's signature right there. You can type in your name, copy and paste a signature, whatever you need to do, just explaining that you or verifying that you understand this explanation of the $300,000 over the 2-year period. Requirements, deadline, again, who to direct questions to. Then we get into the color-coded area. I think on all of yours, I already put in your name, address, and phone number. I just didn't identify the schools because you may have changed them. So I left that and the number of students open. You might need to enter that for us. Then we ask you to fill out your leadership. That should be PCBL. I can't believe there's still these things in here. You will put in your PCBL leadership. That would be your superintendent, your grant manager. I think I already populated Ryan, Royd, Kendra, and Corey's with your names and emails. This is a place where you can change who's on your team. You do need to have a minimum of 4 people. So if these are your 4, you can delete the other 2 if you don't need them. This is where I either copied and pasted your narrative from the implementation grant or put a link to it. And that's there just so you can kind of read it and think back about like, wow, we wrote that 2 years ago and my have things changed. So then in 500 words or less in this cyan area, we'd like you to summarize the lessons you've learned, accomplishments, insights, how your planning and implementation years will be informing your proposed expansion plan and program. So 500 words is short, sweet, succinct. After you've put in your text, I'd love it if you just highlighted the area and changed it back to like no highlight, right? If you leave it, that's fine. It's just going to go into PDF, but that's just a nice way to kind of track, like once you're Once your document is all white and gray, you're done, right? Summarize how the work done has been anchored in one or more of your LEA's current strategic plans. Then identify what needs of the LEA or your community will be addressed by expanding on PCBL over the next 2 years, and what informed this need. And share a brief summary or abstract to highlight the PCBL initiatives that your LEA proposes to expand upon between this July 1st and June 30th of 2024. That's probably the hardest, the heaviest lift of the whole grant application, because then it comes down into your feasible actions. This might be a carryover of what you did in implementation, or you might need to adjust, but it's the basic: who will do what, when will they do it, where will they do it, why are they doing it, how will they do it, how will the stakeholders be engaged, and what will be your evidence of accomplishment. So if you could go ahead and drop in there like what the roles are of the different people on your team and their expectations. Then give us a list of which school campuses or one campus are going to be implementing PCBL. And if you don't use all of the rows, you can always go in and delete what you don't need, just to keep it simple. Number 7 is all about demographics. Here's where we ask you to identify any barriers. You might just write none. Or if there are some barriers that you see or that you've uncovered in the last 2 years, please report them here, and then we can make plans from there on out. And then any partnerships that you might be working with: professional learning, consultants, USBE, other districts, you name it. You're pretty much done there, except for the
Michael.
budget. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, on that partnership place, I mean, is it worth any value for anyone else? But at this point, we're to a place where we almost have created our own little microcosm of support, because you say, well, what districts are we partnering with? Well, everybody on this phone call, I know that's not specific to the grant, but is there any value in showing how the evolution of this grant has built like natural collaborative partnerships and groups for anything that you do?
I would love for you to do that, because I've heard nothing but compliments about you personally, Royd, as well as your district, from places like Davis and a couple other charter schools that said, Royd and Jueb have just been so helpful to us. To have you report that out as well would be a real benefit. And there are going to be bias.
I guess I was referring to, like, I look at Corey and Ryan here, who these are my go-to guys. These are the guys that I talk to when I need help, even though we're not formally in any type of, like Davis and us, we specifically have done some things around our grant, but in a larger scope partnerships, our scale of partnership, and I don't know how Ryan and the others feel about this, but our scale of partnership from where we started, 3 years ago to where we are now in just collaborative conversations, it's tremendous. But
no, we definitely need to identify that. I think there's incredible value in there. If you just sort of summarize what you just said in that spot, working with the other LEAs in cohort A and creating our own capacity for support, that's what needs to be heard.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and I'll also include, because I know I've worked closely with Nikki Sloan from cohort C, as well as several from cohort B who've done campus visits and things like that. So it'd be worth mentioning that too, I think.
Yeah, Nikki is she's on the PCBL review committee, but her school is not in a cohort yet. They're applying for cohort D.
Yeah. Oh, then I've already met with her twice.
Yeah, you met. But like Royd, what you did, I would say a partnership in here, we could say, be sure to point out that TNTP has been like a facilitator of partnerships, because they've provided the opportunity for you and Crystal to meet just the other day with cohort C. So yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. Then a summary of grant awards, the budget table, maybe. Yeah, Kendra?
Sorry, newbie question. On the barriers, what, I guess I'm not sure what that might be, what a barrier would be.
Yep, so if there's a expectation or requirement from USBE about whether it's seat time or anything like that, or taking standardized tests of certain grade level math courses at a certain time when you have students that are accelerated, things like that, that you're like, oh, we can't do this with PCBL because the state requires us to fill in the blank. Any of those barriers, let us know what they are, because we're trying to identify the areas that need waivers. And we have built a flexibility guide that explains how to get those waivers and what adjustments need to be made. So we at USBE want to just create a capacity for you to be successful. And so along with building supports, that also means we have to get stuff out of the way that's preventing you from innovating.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. And you're, our pioneers. So to use the old adage of the elephant, the rider, and the path, whatever we can do to make the path as straight and navigable as possible, we want to do. Budget table. I've never had to fill one of these out, so I don't know if I'm correct in saying this is also a heavy lift. But if you know where that money is going and how
No,
those allocations,
these are very simple and straightforward.
cool. All right, good. Yeah, I mean, you guys know what the codes are for salaries and benefits, the 100, 200, 300, 400. Just let us know how you're going to be divvying up that 300 grand over the 2 years. If you have any questions about this, again, highlight it, make a comment, and send it to me. Then we ask for a little narrative, just justifying and explaining each proposed line item. So like if you were up here and you put in like a large amount of money for like, oh, I don't know, other purchased service or supplies and materials. And then you had to explain like, we're planning to do a retreat for 2 days with our ed tech coaches and our, success coaches, whatever you're going to call them. And you want to just be able to have a place and rent an area and have food. That goes in there. Just give us a narrative of like why you're spending the money the way that you are. And if we need more information, the committee will reach out to you. It wouldn't get rejected for that. We just would want more information. So there's a place to put that right there. Then identify your stakeholders and partners who are committed to implementing the LEA's plan. Now, this doesn't refer to the partners like we were just talking about, Royd, with the other cohorts, but maybe the partners in your community, PTA, organizations, local businesses, whoever it is you're working with that have that are stakeholders in your LEA's plan and program, identify them right there. That's it. After you're done with all of that, you scroll down and sign it. Now, hopefully that's something that can be completed relatively quickly. I am assuming, aspirational assumption here, that you already have all of this information because this is work you've been doing for the last 3 years. And it's really just about telling your story and putting it down on paper so that the committee can look at it, see what you've done, approve it, and continue to support you through the next 2 years of the grant program. If you think that this is still really cumbersome, then don't tell me because it'll hurt my feelings. But what kind of questions do you have about it so far?
I know I left a comment on the draft, but I appreciate the straightforward nature of the expansion grant. So none of this is rocket science to me. So I think it's well placed.
All right. And I appreciate you guys being willing to fill this out and to, your grace with the delay in this. We really didn't know where we were going, if we were getting funding, not funding, what was going to happen. So I'm sorry that we drug our feet on getting this out to you. Looks great. Roy, thank you. Okay, Roy, thanks for joining us, and thank you for your help with all of this, and thanks for being a leader. He just jumped out before I could finish telling him how great he was. It's okay, it's in the recording.
A question for the key stakeholders portion.
Yeah.
I think it said something about signatures there. Let me just make sure that I've got that right as you scroll down.
Partnerships, grant awards, budget, stakeholders include names, titles, role. Oh, does it say signatures on there? Should it? Do we need signatures?
I don't think so, personally. I mean, outside the superintendent's signature that you'll have at the bottom, I don't know if you need signatures from other stakeholders. This might make it a little more cumbersome.
Yeah. You guys can go ahead and delete that on your own. If I don't delete it for you, I'll take a look at those and update them. Yeah.
Thanks.
Anything else on this grant you think is just completely unnecessary that should just be removed?
It looks really good overall.
And it needs to be able to justify, right? the work that you've done and where you're going next. Kendra, any questions?
Oh, so many as I walk through. But it's straightforward. Let me back that up. It's very straightforward. I think it will be easy to do. I'm just looking through Jason's work, making sure that I get everything correct. Jason is a
Yeah.
visionary. By the way, Jason is our new superintendent next year. I don't know if you heard that.
Oh, great.
Yeah, I'm super excited. It's going to be awesome. But he, and I'm sure that Ryan can and Corey can relate to this. He thought we'd be through this whole process in, 2-3 years. And I'm looking at where we are, which is leaps and bounds ahead of what I see some other partner districts at. And yet we still need a couple more years. So I really, really appreciate the work you've done to make this grant keep happening.
Cool. It sounds to me like you just wrote the first sentence of the first part of your grant application.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, boy, you just summed it up right there. That was great.
Butter him up with flattery and then hit him with the reality.
No. I mean, what you said about how, Jason was expecting this to happen in 2 years. And that once you got into the process, you realized you still have years to go. I mean, that's what we want to hear.
Yeah.
So much. In fact, right now my assessment writing team is refining our district benchmarks.
Yeah.
And I think when Jason put those together, I just, we kind of felt like it'd be sort of a one and done, and maybe just one person could kind of help update them as needed. Oh no, it's a massive thing. So yeah, I can see that this is an ongoing thing, definitely worth it, but ongoing as we work to refine all of the pieces of it.
Cool.
I think about how some of our, smaller to medium-sized school districts are moving this work ahead and still finding, like Kendra says, all these pieces that still need to be done and much more to do. And I just wonder how it's possible for a district the size of Davis, and you've seen Blaine talk about this earlier with Alpine, to scale this out. I'm hopeful, and I'm sure you're working on it, that there are additional funds accessible to districts even beyond this expansion, whatever, that might be able to support it, whether it's under this grant series or a different, that would be helpful, because there's going to be a lot of work to do over the next 5 to 7 years, in my opinion.
I don't know if it'll be like actually earmarked or labeled PCBL, but the funding is coming because the change is happening, and the change is happening all throughout the entire USBE agency. So like I said in our meeting before, like UETs, everything, high quality instruction. And so there will be funding attached to all of those things. And I think you're going to see PCBL as an element in all of those initiatives. So whether or not there's, 5 years from now, something called a PCBL grant remains to be seen, but there will definitely be funding for this evolution that's happening.
That's beautiful.
I should be a politician, right? I'll be running for governor on the PCBL platform. The expansion grant scoring is the exact same as implementation and planning, except that it's going to be mostly yes or no's. This again is not competitive. So we're just gonna be looking at it like, did your narrative summarize what's happened so far and what's coming next? And was it clear? And do you have a plan for the budget? So nothing too competitive there. Then the application is due on the 29th. Like I said, I'll take off the editing rights or just turn it to a PDF. By May 26th, everyone on the review committee will have finalized their voting and gone in. That'll be by Google Form this year. So it'll be really easy to just roll through the grants, vote, submit, next, continue. Then in June, we will announce to the board which PCBL grant applications have been accepted and what the cohorts will be. And then the funding will begin on July 1st. There's the 2 years. They do not need to be, the funds do not need to be distributed evenly over the 2 years. And you saw that in the budget summary. And that's it. All I have now, or if you have any other questions, or if you have questions in the future, again, you can put them into the Google Doc. You can email me at michael.hakkarainen@schools.utah.gov. I'm sure that if you just start typing HAKK, I will pop up If not me, my wife, if you work with librarians in Jordan High School. But anyway, put in HAKK, I'll pop up. I've emailed you so much that I'll be there. If you get down to the wire the last week and there's an emergency or you need something and I'm not responding to you by email, this is my personal cell phone number. You're always welcome to text or call me there. I should get back to you right away. I'll be irritated because especially if it's on a weekend and I'm like out skiing or something. No, I won't be irritated. If you have an emergency, text or call me there. But mostly with email, I get back to people within 24 hours. Corey Henwood, I respond to him within 5 minutes, right, Corey?
Absolutely.
Ryan, it's usually a week for you, isn't it, buddy? So that's my contact if you have other questions. Anything I can answer for you today? Here, I went 2 minutes over. All right, well, guys, thanks so much for joining and for your time, and look forward to seeing your applications and getting on with the next year and the expansion. So have a good rest of the day.